stories, you're talking about stories. The problem with the internet and with the social media and with these open, wide spaces is that they can also spread lots of lies. And we literally are living the end of the truthful, true journalism and also information at large because of state-sponsored lies, if you like. So how do we counter this, Tonya? What do we do?
I have quite different view on this sort of topic of the day that we call like fake news, lies, or as in the Oxford Dictionary, they called it post-truth. It was the word of this year. I do not find it too remarkable that people lie. That's not a new thing. You know, people always lied. Why these lies are now more important than ever before, I do not have answer to this.
It's because it's done by institutions, by presidents-to-be, by states. I mean, individuals.
But they were doing this before as well.
Yeah, but not, I don't think at the scale. I don't think at scale. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it's, you know, really important that we do not concentrate on these things, but that we concentrate on empowering journalists, on working in making sure that there are more voices, more online platforms, more journalist associations that are ready to engage in investigative journalism. So I think the direction of the states and all of us have to be in a positive direction, not trying to stop these lies.
I agree.
So that is, in a way, maybe, you know, a bit different. Of course, this is news all over the place. You know, the mainstream media is reporting about fake news, but this is misinformation. These are lies, and you know, this is something that is the mentality of people. Is just simply something that cannot be stopped. But there is a way to tackle this from a different side, and this is education, literacy. It is a long way. It is not an easy one, but I do not see any other one. Everything else I would call simply censorship.
Sure, I understand. I mean, it's also very interesting that you should say that we should have other outlets, just to counter, at least balance the you know, what's being said and what's being put. You called for a strong role also for, you know, individuals, not only governments, and I totally agree with that. And you said we should take action. What kind of action? If we're here today, we're all here, and you tell us what to do, 1, 2, 3, what should we do?
Well, I think people should be talking to their parliaments. They should be politically active and not passive. We do not live in a time when we can just, you know, sit comfortably in our chairs and complain about our, you know, bad governments or, you know, bad journalists or anything. We need to be more engaged as individuals. Sure. But what governments need to do, they need to move from words to deeds. And that is a problem that we see in too many countries, the OSCE region that I cover with my role, but also globally. You have international organizations that are trying to avoid, including my own, too much politics. You know, we should not be criticizing the leaders. We should not be, you know, saying things that would upset the powerful. I think that is wrong. I think too much diplomacy cannot solve any of these problems. Just the other day, we had a political leader who is now at the top of the EU organization calling journalists dirty prostitutes.
That's
and
sad.
Many were silent. International organizations were silent. I was not silent because I think it's unacceptable.
It's good you still have your job.
Yeah, well,
no,
you know, you can lose the job anytime, but the most important thing is to do the right thing, you know, not to stay silent when you see that there are issues that are not acceptable in the society. And this is one of the things, because if this kind of language is coming from the powerful, that is not helping ordinary people, and that is also not helping journalists to be able to do their job freely and safely.
That's very interesting. May I call the minister to come up again and perhaps share with us in the conversation? We still have a few minutes. I think that would be very interesting. Well, as you see with me, I have two females who are in responsible positions. And usually females, when they reach positions of prime ministers or whatever, there is always other females saying, oh, you're not doing enough for women or for females. And I think you, Minister, were telling us about the gathering you had for other female foreign ministers, which I find fascinating and indeed extremely useful. How can you two, tell us about one or two practical steps that we can take that will help us move this agenda forward for women journalists?
I mean, what I can do, I'm not a politician.
Sure, but you are in a position to help.
Yes. So what I do is I raise these issues with the government. I speak to each and every journalist that come to talk to me about the harassment. We address issues publicly, but also using quiet diplomacy. I mean, personally, not too much. I'm more for being very public about these things. So we raise the issue of harassment with the government directly, or foreign ministers, if that's the case. But what we also do, we have projects like the one I mentioned on online abuse of female journalists that we started in 2015. We brought some publications here in order to raise awareness, and in this we had Swedish government as a government helping us to do this. Otherwise, we would not be, able to continue with this project. And with this project, we are also in contact with many international organizations, but also NGOs that play a crucial role in this. This is not something that only intergovernmental organizations or the governments can do. This needs to be also really with the engagement, full engagement of NGOs that are struggling also financially in order to tackle these things. Raising awareness, using my voice as the most powerful tool I have in a toolbox, but that's, then we come to the wall. And from that moment, the only thing that can happen is political will of the governments in order to really comply with the commitments or the values, or to honor those values. And the problem is they don't do this.
Sure. Yes. I don't think it's the problem with your government, is it? Do you find it difficult to take these demands to your other fellow ministers, to the Prime Minister?
I think you always, unfortunately today, we find increasingly that democracy and human rights in general are pushed aside, that it is increasingly difficult to argue and advocate for democracy and democratic reforms and defense of human rights. So this is something where we have to rally around those basic principles, and what we can do as a government. I mentioned a few things in my speech. I think we have to continue to also protect, when we can, female journalists and also other journalists that work in very repressive environments, to make sure that we support awareness raising, that we do all of these things also embedded and integrated into our development policies, for example, and continue to fight for it openly and talk about it. As you said also, we have now to encourage people to think themselves about what is right and wrong, and also to speak up and continue to support free speech, also when we are under attack and criticized. And this helps us to stay on our toes and to stay true to the principles of free speech.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know, of course, the limitation on your time as a foreign minister. I imagine you traveling all around the world, plus Europe, etc. But we indeed are hoping that this will be on top of your agenda, Minister. I'm going to play a game with you now, and it's called Catchbox. Okay, so, and I hope the minister has a little bit of time. It's going to take about 5 minutes. I'm going to throw a ball to you, which has a microphone, and basically you can ask a question. So I'm trying to be a very good football player. Just do not be afraid. This is not metal box, and try to catch it, okay? Yes. Are you assured?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to stand up because I actually do not know how to throw a ball very well, but I'm going to try. Okay, who wants to ask a question? Anybody knows, so that I throw it towards you? Oh, I see. Nobody wants to ask a question. Anybody over there? No? Anyway, I'm going to throw it, and let's see what it gets. Oops! There you go. No democracy here. Okay. Or an intervention, or a...
Okay.
Sorry, can you say your name, please, and your affiliation?
My name is Jesper, and I am directing an organization working to promote the issues that you are talking about globally, preoccupied with taking actions in some of the most difficult environments around the world. So I see and experience what you have been talking about. And I am, this is more a comment than a question, but I am deeply, deeply grateful to Sweden, for one. I see Sweden standing on this agenda globally. I've met some of your ambassadors saying we stand sometimes very much alone on this issue. I realized that we have, I was in Oslo yesterday, we also have Norway standing very firm on this agenda as well. So I hope that this concept of acting and moving from words to deeds often comes up. And one of my hopes, and is something that maybe could be turned into a question, is that you mentioned it, we meet at conferences. And my analysis is that there's too many conferences. And once you work on the ground, when you have feet deep into these environments, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in Syria now, my organization works in all these countries, together with Fojo, in many of them, a good partner. We see complete imbalance in a sense of presence, lack of presence of actors and actions that are helping journalists, female and male journalists in those environments.
Would you like to comment?
Well, I'm thinking, why not sort of adopt one or two or three journalists that we know are really under pressure and in difficulties, and say, let's look at every way to support them. Physical safety, or just by moral support, or keeping in touch, making sure that we always know where they are, or just organize these kind of things can also help in certain situations, and then of course not putting anyone in danger or more danger, but really make sure that there is somebody also for these journalists, that they know there is somebody who will actually ask where I am.
Yeah, can I just say to you, there are some organizations specifically for Syria that are helping training journalists and also helping them, especially working in the war zone areas. There are very, very little women journalists left there, like hardly any, because of the threat of rape, the threat of, in the regime jails, there are quite few journalists, and we know nothing about them. So
and also men must speak up also against this threat against the female journalists. So they have to say, this is totally unacceptable. And
Yes, we're running out of time, so I would like to be brief, but I'd like to listen to you.
I completely agree what you're saying, and the countries that you mentioned are countries, for example, that OSCE is not covering at all. We have UNESCO doing, tremendous job. At the UN, there are different mechanisms, but there is no rapid response. These journalists, when they are attacked, there is nobody to raise the voice. And that is also the problem. It's not just about trainings. It's the moment when they are attacked, there is no response. And that is something that we also need to look at.
Thank you, Donia. I think there is a lady. Can you just be as brief as possible, please? Because there is another intervention I'd like to take.
So, hi, my name is Ulrika Engström. I'm working for the Swedish Institute, and I'm also on the board of Swedish PEN. And I have a question, because, if we have a society with these much threats against women and also against writers and journalists, it's very easy to come to a solution which is fear and legislation that is not for free speech. So how can we tackle this very pressing issue of actually not solving it through a legislation that is against free speech, I would say?
Sure. Minister, would you like to briefly?
This is, of course, the constant debate also, where to draw the line, and also try to avoid to do something that will actually decrease freedom of speech. And I think we just have to stay very true to the principles. And this is why one should not change also a legislation that has already been adopted and shapes a format and a norm for all of this. And so we should be very, very careful in starting to say that we have to squeeze this a little bit more, or we have to change this or that piece of legislation. So one has to keep a certain distance. And at the same time, what we were talking about before has to do with what do we do when countries, member states of the European Union, actually do not respect the freedom of speech, for example, and how do we intervene then that we have a lack of those instruments, also legal instruments, but to always protect the freedom of speech and the basic fundamentals in this legislation.
Thank you, Minister. Briefly, please.
Hello, my name is Eva Burman. I'm editor-in-chief at Eskilstuna-Kuriren, and we are very often getting threats, and me especially as a woman. And we have found that the harassments and the hate we meet is organized in a majority of times. What can we do about that?
Yeah, this is
to harass us.
Do you go to the law? Do you?
No,
you must be protected.
They're not actually breaking the laws, but they constantly hate us and record us and put us on.
Can you
online.
name them and shame them?
What?
Can you name them and shame them?
No, they are anonymous. They don't use their real names.
Well, don't show them you are afraid. I think this is one of the good things. Sorry, I have hardly any. Would you like to just briefly, very, very briefly? Okay.
My name is Mogens Blikker Bjerregaard from the European Federation of Journalists. Just a comment to what has been said here. I think it's very important when these harassments they happen that they are reported immediately, and that the bosses at the on the media outlet they take action, because you cannot let the female journalist alone with these harassments.
Thank you.
They must stand up for them.
That's good.
And I think that at each media outlet, it's important that you have somebody that the female journalist and all the journalists actually could go to, and talk to about this, because there are too much of these harassments that are hidden away. And
I think the minister was referring to this by saying we need the men also, men's help.
Exactly.
So thank you very much. I have to end this session, unfortunately. It's been like a wonderful session. I want to thank you, Minister, very, very much for your time and for being kind and patient with my questions. And thank you, Dunya, as well, for very informative presentation and also answer. No, we want you also to be our hero, Minister. We need you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dunya. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Minister.